Hi, I'm Jeff Meier, co-host for Super Deluxe Gamescast, probably better known as SDGC or official SDGC. We're a live gaming podcast that airs every Thursday night on Twitch, and all our episodes get uploaded to podcast services afterwards. I'm here today to talk to you about a game that you've probably heard of and definitely isn't underrated, but something I wanted to come at with a slightly different perspective because I think it gets written off by a lot of people for reasons that might be valid, but other reasons that I think might be overblown or is not a big deal, as some people think they are. The game is Final Fantasy XIV. For those who don't know, Final Fantasy series is typically single-player RPGs, but they did do a couple of MMOs. One was Final Fantasy XI back in the early 2000s, and then Final Fantasy XIV, which came out just in the last decade here. It's been around for quite a few years now and had lots of expansions. And I think a lot of people write this one off immediately because it's an MMO, and they don't like MMOs. Well, I don't like MMOs, and honestly, I love this game. It worked its way into my top favorite games of all time. And I think the main thing people don't understand is, I mean, there might be some things about these types of games that do put you off it and you can't get past, but the main one is like, people assume you can't play these by yourself. You can't play them like a single player game. I'm here to tell you, you absolutely can play this like a single player Final Fantasy game. I soloed the entire game from start to finish, all expansions, without playing with a single friend, without having to go on a looking for group thing. There are certain dungeons, raids, and things like that that are part of the main story. They're probably only about 5 to 10% of the overall quests, but the game has a fantastic in-game matchmaking tool called the Duty Finder. Depending on what server you're on and what class you're playing, you might have to wait even up to 15 or 30 minutes to get rolled into one of these, but it's really not a big deal. I keep a book on hand or my Switch, and you just do something else to fill the time while you wait. And like I said, the vast majority of the content can be done completely alone, and it is very satisfying. I think it's actually better done that way. The way that the structure in the game works, it's better to do it at your own pace, I think, and not have to worry about other people who are maybe not on the same quest or something like that. So that's the first thing I want to touch on is, if that's all you're worried about, give this game a try because you can play it by yourself and it is great like that. The second one is, this is a Final Fantasy game. Do you need to play other Final Fantasy games to appreciate this? And the answer is no. It's a standalone story. I think all the individual elements, the environments, the characters, the music, and all that, the story, they all hold up completely on their own. However, if you've even just played a few other Final Fantasy games, you will get a bit more appreciation for it. There's a lot of names, locations, enemies, things like that come back in a cool, reimagined sort of way, with unique twists on them that is obviously there for the longtime fans, but by no means is that knowledge necessary to enjoy this game. And I think the third big put off for a lot of people is the feeling of being overwhelmed or just scared of the time commitment, because you hear the amount of hours that people put into these games and they wonder, I can't put in 1,000, 2,000 hours to get through this whole game. And honestly, I think if you just look at it individual pieces, so the base game is known as a Realm Reborn. That's kind of the main initial release of the 2.0 version of the game that was redone after the disastrous launch. That one's about 40 to 50 hours if you just mainline it, which really isn't that much different than a big single-player RPG. And then there's content between that and the next expansion, which is about 30 hours. And then each of the expansions are about 40 hours. So if you just consider this as a game series that's been going on for 7+ years now with multiple entries, and you just look at each entry as being, 30, 40, 50 hours, I mean, it's a time commitment for sure, but it's really not that different than what a lot of us are probably used to playing. And you certainly don't have to play it all at once. This game is designed, admittedly, by the development team, that you can binge this and play it in chunks and then take a few months off and come back, and it doesn't punish you for that. So definitely, it will take you a while to get through all the content, but there's no rush to do it, and it is manageable. So that's one thing I think people just kind of need to look past and just give the game a shot, and you might find that the time just disappears and you don't even notice it fly by. So those are a few things that I think that put me off initially as well, and I had to get past and weren't an issue at all when I was playing through the game. But before I go, I also want to touch on the parts about the game that are really the reasons why I love it and that stood out to me. And one is the focus on narrative and storytelling. This is, I mentioned earlier, but I played games like World of Warcraft and Star Wars Galaxies and stuff like that. And these games, they have a story, but it's not told in a compelling way to me. It's too dry, or it's just not good enough, I guess. I don't know. But Final Fantasy XIV has a huge focus on story. There's tons of dialogue, and as you get later throughout the expansions, they increase the amount of voice acting to the point where most cutscenes by the end of Shadowbringers are, by and large, fully voiced, fully acted, and it really just ups the emotional investment in the game. And that's just the thing I love about this, and why I think it is a true Final Fantasy, is it has all the crazy elements you expect out of a Final Fantasy story. All the awesome moments and cutscenes and character moments and things like that really make it stand out. And it honestly has some of my favorite parts and favorite story beats of any game in the series, especially if you're a fan of Final Fantasy. I think you owe it to yourself to try and see some of what this one has to offer in terms of that department. And then obviously just everything surrounding the story, all the other individual elements of the game are so well done. The music is fantastic. The art, the environments, the enemy design, it's all every bit as good as you'd expect from a game bearing the Final Fantasy name, and stands up there with the best entries in the series. The world is huge, there's so much to explore. I really can't put it into words, it's just something you have to experience for yourself, and I think that's one of the things that kept me going. You know, a lot of people talk about the early part of the game, before the expansions. The story is a little meandering, it's not super compelling, the game takes a long time to find its footing, and it does get there eventually, but these are the pieces of the game that kept me going even throughout that. It's just hanging out, walking through a town, listening to the music. It really helps smooth over some of the rockier parts of the game. Lastly, is the community. You know, I generally avoid any kind of online multiplayer game because I just don't want to deal with other people online because they're usually insufferable. But the community in Final Fantasy XIV is by far probably the best community I've ever seen in an online game. And granted, I haven't played a lot of MMOs, so maybe this is just an MMO thing where their communities tend to be a little bit better than what you'd see in like a first-person shooter. I can't really speak to that. What I can say is I can count on one hand, this is after like 250 or 300 hours in this game, I can count on one hand the number of rude people that I've run into in the chat and stuff like that doing dungeons and raids. Everyone's typically very supportive, very helpful. If I haven't done something before, I'm not sure the mechanics in a boss fight, I ask people, tell them, hey, it's my first time, and they walk me through it. They're usually very patient, and it's been so pleasant for someone who doesn't really like interacting with other people in this manner. It's actually been really cool and heartwarming just to get that kind of bond, even if it's only for an hour with someone before you never talk to them again. So that's really cool. And that's really all I have to say about the game. I can't really go into the main things of why I specifically love it so much because they're all story-based, and I certainly don't want to spoil anything for anyone. But you can find deals on the trials. Give it a chance. That's all I'm saying, especially if you love RPGs, if you love Final Fantasy. Give this game a chance and just see if it clicks with you. You don't need to force it, but I think a lot of people will be pleasantly surprised by what they find. As for myself, you can catch me on Super Deluxe Gamescast. That's at official SDGC on Twitter and Twitch. Like I said, we're airing every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern on Twitch, and our episodes go up on audio services like SoundCloud, Spotify, iTunes a few days after that. Hope to see you there. Until next time, happy gaming.